Ella, I just want to talk a little bit about the latest rioting in Dublin. Another sort of centre for asylum seekers has been attacked. I think it was attacked 4 times in the past week. Is that right?
Yeah, in a suburb of Dublin called Coolock. Since the beginning of the year, there's been some form of unrest there. It began as sort of overtly political, peaceful protests. There was various encampments because the plans were that this large factory site was going to be earmarked for accommodation for asylum seekers, somewhere in the region of between 500 and 1,000. It sort of varies the numbers, but a lot of people, put it that way, in a place where Coolock is, the Commitments was filmed there. If anyone remembers that 1990s film, it's pretty run down, as many suburbs of Dublin are. And the community was pissed off about the fact that this was happening. Peaceful protests were ignored, and they started to escalate. And in the last week, just gone, 4 arson attempts. Again, it seems to me unbelievable that the Gardaí couldn't manage, the Irish police couldn't manage to secure the area. The fact that there was 4 arson attempts, and the place is pretty much sort of half destroyed, and running battles with the police, tear gas, batons, all the rest of it. But to come back to what Paul said about the difference between sort of political grievances and these sort of semi-social individuated outbursts, the unrest in Coolock and similar things that have happened, quite violent stuff that's been happening, for example, in Tala, pipe bombs, arson attempts, further down the road in Wicklow and Newtown Mount Kennedy, they are deeply political because they're speaking to a big problem in Ireland, not just of numbers of asylum seekers. There's been 10,600 in the first half of this year. That's going to, more than double probably, at a time when there's a 250,000 housing deficit in a country that has 5.1 million people. Is that tinderbox kind of statistics we're talking? But it's not just that. It's that in Ireland, if you think the British media and the British elite are bad at the immigration debate, you want to go to Ireland, where it is impossible to even say the word immigration without being jumped on. The sort of the censorship around the issue is visceral, and it has driven people who have genuine concerns that you might agree with or disagree with about, GP places, housing, all the rest of it. And I would always tend to say it's the government's fault rather than immigrants' faults. But no discussion has been had with those people, and there's only so many times you can tell someone to put up and shut up before it starts to take on a different kind of tone, and it's a really big problem. I mean, there's glimmers of hope. The unusual thing about Coolock is that it got to such an extent that the Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris and the leader of the opposition, Mary Lou McDonald, Sinn Féin had to go into crisis talks, and Sinn Féin has now come out and said there needs to be a new policy on immigration, that any of these sites should be put to public consultation before they're decided on. I have a feeling that's a load of BS, and it's going to just be a sort of fob off. But I think it's a shift, because it's a recognition that the Irish government has just been picking the most urban and deprived and the most rural parts of the country to just dump people, which is unfair on the asylum seekers who are suddenly it's hard enough to be, London Irish going into a small town in Ireland, let alone being from a different part of the world, because there's still a big issue of whether or not you're from the area and blow-ins and all the rest of it. It's unfair on them, and it's completely unfair on these communities, many of whom will have had, for example, in a place where I live, in Wicklow, community hall that was promised and long fought over and planning permission, and something the community really needed, suddenly given over to asylum seeker accommodation. So the whole thing is unfair, and I think there's something really terrible about what's happening in Ireland, but it's a really good example of how the sort of silence around the issue of immigration can cause real problems.